Hi, everyone. Welcome to part 3 of the tour guide training in Koshrai, Federated States of Micronesia for the UNESCO Participation Program. In this particular part, we'll be looking at the Koshrine environment and ecology and some considerations as well. So the overview of this particular part of the training, we're going to look at Koshrai's Area of Biological Significance, or ABS. We'll look at subsistence, have a discussion of ethnobotany, ethnomedicine, and pharmaceuticals, drawing from background in geography and anthropology, as well as the disciplines of ethnobotany and ethnomedicine specifically. So Koshrai, in terms of biological significance, according to the Nature Conservancy, there are 6 conservation targets in Koshrai's area of biological significance. And you can learn more about each one of these and perhaps share stories with other guides as well as individuals in the community. So this is in a broader sense, you have areas of mixed broadleaf forest as well as the lowest cloud forest in the world, the montane cloud forest. And then the fir and sedge savanna as well. In terms of particular animals, you have the Arno skink, the Koshrai flying fox, and the Micronesian pigeon. The protection of subsistence practices is, of course, incredibly important for Koshrai in terms of maintaining livelihoods and eating locally produced foods. When the native forests are intact, such as are preserved through the Mahkontowe Conservation Area, they help to anchor the soil and prevent it from washing into streams and settling on the reefs. And so there's a nice connection here between healthy forests, healthy upland forests, healthy rivers, bringing the water down to the ocean, supplying fresh water as well to Koshrai, and then the healthy reef, which of course allows for multiple species of corals and fish and other species on the reef, which of course also relate to subsistence fishing and gathering as well. The Mahkontowe Conservation Area is an area protected under and by the Protected Areas Act of 2010 from GEMCO funding. As we noted before, it helps to protect watersheds. It also allows for the protection of subsistence activities throughout the island of Koshrai. There's also a usefulness of the preservation of the site in terms of the archaeological aspects and the oral histories that are related to memories of those sites and how those memories are passed down between generations. So here you can just see an example photo from some of the upland areas in terms of the vegetation representation here. In terms of ethnobotany, you might pause the recording now and just take a stock of what you know personally about plants on Koshrai. And then specifically in the upland regions. Now, you might even start a tour lower down with visitors having various vantage points of the Sleeping Lady and talk about the hike that you're going to do. You might also talk about some of the plants that you might see in these lower elevations, and then you can point those out again at the higher elevations. Of course, the group, if you have a larger group, it's easier to get everybody together. And at the lower elevations, when you're driving out initially or preparing for the hike, maybe an initial meeting at one of the resorts or other meeting points or areas. So as an exercise here, think about plants that you know. Name 3 of those plants, and then if you can think about what they're named in various naming systems, including potentially English, Koshraian, scientific nomenclature, the 2-name naming system, binomial nomenclature. So what is the use of the plant? Is it for food, medicine, building materials, potentially other uses as well? When and how is the particular plant collected and harvested? Are there particular stories about the plant that are related to the particular plants or traditional stories that are associated with either the use or collection of the plant. And of course, the Koshrayan moon calendar is also very informative here in terms of when to participate in various subsistence activities. That's, of course, located in many locations in the literature, and there's also a copy of that in the appendix of the tour guide training manual. And you can also bring in some personal stories that you have about this plant, you or your family. So as you're working through this, again, feel free to pause the recording and make a list of these various plants to share with others. And here are some examples that have come out from discussions with Koshrayans about different plants on Koshrai. So here you have noni, for example, and its use in medicine with coconut oil, the leaf and root for toothache or numbing. And then if you eat the fruit, it is thought to be good for diabetics or those with high blood pressure. The harvest, the information's here, and then discussions were related to personal discussions or use within the family, for example. And of course, you can relate these to your guests on Koshrai. The ka, and this use in construction for cooking, in the particularly, and the carving aspects. So the harvesting and the stories, and then of course the sounding or the location in the ka forest to indicate where someone might be at. Of course, you might not have access, you won't have access to these trees throughout the MCA, so you can also, for example, use the whistle, use a whistle or other sounding device. The canoe is local transportation, and so you can talk about maybe a little bit of the changes in transportation as well as in subsistence practices that have occurred over the generations. So in lived memory, how have things changed over time? Stories of maybe parents or grandparents or even further back that commuted to school through boats and actually commuted to their upland farms or farms in other locations by canoes. And how the road came in and how that changed life on Koshrai. It might also talk about replacement technology with fiberglass boats and outboard motors versus the locally made canoes with paddles. Hibiscus is known as a fire starter to make rope. Leaves can be used for cooking. Flowers for medicine. And then harvest when the flower is yellow. For the canoe, you harvest it about 6 inches to a foot in diameter. So again, this is all fascinating information for guests. It'll demonstrate your knowledge of Koshrai, and being able to see a plant and potentially touch a plant and experience the plant in the MCA with you as a guide is quite a memorable visitor experience, and it's quite enjoyable experience. So breadfruit, of course, it's important in food as well as trapping for other food as well in the outrigger canoe use of the bark, and then some others here as well. And again, feel free to pause the recording, read more through this, take your own notes on this, and add to this information with your own knowledge and share this with others as well. Of course, there are a variety of different contexts and sources for the information specific to Micronesia as well as Koshrai. And of course, Dana Lee Ling is an excellent resource at Ecology of Micronesia, FSM, in his Micronesian ethnobotany book, which I have referenced in the tour guide training. So again, consider the plants and the information above in the context of the literature on ethnomedicine that follows. So keeping in mind all this specific information locally, you might contextualize it by bringing in some of the other broader information that people coming into Koshrai may know about in parts or aspects of it. So what will the below, what I'm going to present add to your knowledge? What can you share with visitors? And consider use as both food and medicine. So specifically to medicine, we're talking here about ethnomedicine. So ethnomedicine, historically, this was identified as a marker of indigenous origins, indigenous peoples, and a variety of systems of dealing with disease. Now, all medical systems are part and parcel of the social and cultural environment within which they emerge. So the medical systems are based around knowledge, how knowledge is produced, how it's thought about, how it's talked about, how it's judged. All of these things are cultural. And of course, we can see this with recent phenomena like the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of a variety of different ways of dealing with COVID-19, preventing the spread of COVID-19, and then all of the meanings behind the things like mask wearing, vaccination, social distancing overall. Of course, that's all through how you might view things from your own social and cultural perspective. And that varies quite a bit. And, we, in the United States, we saw variation even between different states where people of different political values or religions. Lynn Payer's work, Medicine and Culture, in the book, Lynn Payer notes that there are multiple biomedicines depending on the country and the culture. So biomedical doctors vary from country to country. In Germany, they're less likely to prescribe antibiotics as they focus on natural recuperation and healing of the body. Women in France typically get breast reductions, while women in the United States get breast enlargements. And so, again, the cultural meanings and what is acceptable. And so when you're going to the hospital, you might think about the interaction of local knowledge, culture, beliefs, and practices in the context of, how that relates to health and healing locally. So traditional approaches to healing, these traditional systems are historically derived. They have, in many instances, have magical and religious rituals that are designed to maintain harmony in the human, natural, and supernatural worlds. So as you're moving through these different worlds, how do you maintain harmony? And this is the discussion of things like rituals and whatnot. Of course, the MCA, as well as other locations throughout Koshrai, have a rich history, different understandings of the environment and of life as a whole. And you might share with visitors some of these things. The estimated efficacy or effectiveness for these various traditional practices is between 25 and 50%, shown to be effective using biomedical and scientific standards. And in many instances, we see cross-cultural healing leading to better results overall. So again, beliefs, practices, systems, and again, the patient outlook is a big indicator of how treatments are going at any given point in time. So when we think about healing systems, there's a lot of different ways to think about it. Erickson looked at ethnomedical theories of disease causation from biomedical understanding, so the germ theory of disease, a loss of internal systems in the body, this idea of homeostasis or regulation, or illness caused by an outside person. So outside people become dangerous. They might cast a spell. In Italy, Sicily would be the evil eye that they would give. In Russia, they have these what are called vampiric shamans. So in different settings. Foster and Anderson, every medical system embraces this disease theory system, which is either personalistic or naturalistic. Personalistic systems focus on agency that is the ability to choose, make decisions, and act on those decisions of people, non-people, non-human animals, plants, and then supernatural beings as well. And then naturalistic systems look at and would root disease in an imbalance of certain elements. The healthcare system, of course, shows us the relationship between interactions between healers and patients. Luciano and Sobo in their 1997 work looked at practitioners at the personalistic and naturalistic levels. For the personalistic practitioners, these would be shamans, mediums, sorcerers, and priests. And then naturalistic were herbalists, chemists, body workers, and lay midwives. So different typologies of healing systems. Jung looked at the way medical systems organize knowledge about disease, either internally, so there would be these physiological explanations or the way the body works, and then particular signs that you would see on the body for that, and then externalizing systems that, it was cold, or there was some wind, or there's some noise, or something scared me. This idea of susto in Mexico, for example. So these different explanations for why disease occurs. Then knowledge transfer, how is information shared? And it's not just through writing systems. And sometimes it might not be shared at all. So accumulating medical systems are marked by formalized teaching, written forms, so books, in institutions, so schools, medical schools, for example. Diffusing, generally information is not shared. Practitioners, and sometimes is regarded as secret. So these would be shamans, in other settings, you might have one particular person that would be trained rather than broad sharing of the information. Fabria, in 1997, looked at biocultural or medical ecological and hypothesized that biological adaptation of sickness and healing. Healers in early foraging societies possessed elaborate knowledge of social organization. So again, many different explanations for healing systems. Some of the, again, broader perspective here, give you a little bit more background that you could potentially share with visitors to Koshai and MCA, and think about particularly how these things interact not only on Koshai historically, but also today, and then compare that to the social cultural setting that your visitors are coming from. And of course, being curious about their own background and experience. You could say something like, well, on Koshai we do this, what do you do in Denmark? Or what do you do in Pennsylvania? Or what do you do in Italy? So evolutionary view on illness theories and healing systems. This relates to the types of society. So in nomadic foraging societies, the purported causes of illness are self, ancestors, gods, and outsiders. The types of healers are shamans and diviners. Shamans have these individual or idiosyncratic techniques amongst the Inuit and Australian Aborigines, for example. And the shaman will visit the supernatural realm in order to petition for favors on behalf of the person that is sick or ill. In early empires and civilizations, the purported causes of illness are individual behaviors. So somebody did something bad, basically moral feelings, elaborate ethnopathologies. So how the pathology arises and continues to develop. Imbalance in the body's humors or fluids within the body. Different humors regulate the body under this particular system. Types of healers are priests, professional physicians, folk, and religious healers. And when we're talking about medicine and we're talking about health and healing, all medicine is ethnomedicine, and this goes back to what we were saying earlier and gets to the comparative perspective, right? So every single medical system is based on social and cultural belief systems and practices, right? Medicine does not exist outside of a particular society. And so we can think about the discussion of ethnomedicine in relation to plants as a broader discussion about society and belief systems overall. Michel Foucault's work in 1800, he noted that biomedicine emerged in Europe with more focus on the body than on the ill person, in what Foucault called the clinical gaze. And so this is, the book's quite rich and talks about the distancing of physicians from patients with the invention of more and more instrumentation. So it's the idea that you're not necessarily looking at the entire person, but you're looking at one particular aspect and potentially using an instrument to do that. Friedson's 1970 work, Position of Biomedicine in Modern Societies, basically elites control this, and professional dominance is delegated rather than absolute. This is not universal, with increasing patient rights, medical negligence claims, and increase in complementary and alternative medicine. Also, the status will vary in different settings. Some have less prestige than other professions, and increased interest in ethnographies located in hospital settings. So, what actually happens in the hospital? How are ideas, policies, and procedures created and followed or not followed, for example? Now, one of the big discussions about ethnomedicine has been the discussion around intellectual property rights and the idea of preservation of genetic material and, pardon me, and their use in different cultural settings, particularly for large profit and pharmaceuticals. So Etkin's work looks at examining the efficacy or how well pharmaceuticals work depends on various cultural understandings of what efficacy means. So what does it mean to have a medicine work? The cultural construction of pharmaceuticals as modern or Western is sometimes these acquire these culturally constructed fetishized qualities. In other words, they're like this, they in themselves will do this thing because it's like a lucky charm, right? That's going to bring personal fortune. So there's this the object itself or the pill itself or the IV itself has this power in and of itself. Locke and Eugen, 2010, described biomedical technology, these intensive procedures, and that critical medical anthropologists that look at the politics and economics behind medicine note the uneven results for rich and poor. And of course, this is a lot of what we're seeing in the discussion of intellectual property rights and social justice in terms of making this information available and who profits from this overall. So in this particular section, we covered quite a bit specific to Koshrai in terms of its area of biological significance, particular plants that are found on Koshrai. And we also thought about it in another context, in a larger context. And I provide that background information to you to be able to, so that you can better situate what it is that you're sharing with visitors and understand their own cultural perspective. So the idea that the tour guide leading and being a tour guide is about sharing information and creating information about the sense of place and understanding. So question to think about, take some time to write out your response based on your notes and the tour guide training manual. What would you share with the visitor in terms of the natural features, plants, medicine, and culture of Koshrai? How would you bring that together for them?